Evil never retreats. The only time that evil ever retreats is once it faces something that's stronger.
Dear friends, today I have the privilege and the fun, actually, of being with my pastor, Frank Ramseur, here in Chattanooga, California. Magari. I wish we were in Chattanooga, Tennessee. That was a Freudian slip,
I think so.
wasn't it?
Yeah. Your inner desire slipped
I
up.
know, I miss the water. I do miss the water. But we're close to Florida here, so that's not bad. And that's where you're from, aren't you?
See.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, Frank, you mentioned something on Sunday. You mentioned courage, and I wanted to address that issue of courage because I think nowadays a lot of people are kind of diluted, watered down, and God calls us to be the light in the midst of darkness. What does that mean? You know, to be the salt and not get unsalted. So I wanted to look at this whole issue of courage, you know, kind of get a point of view from you because you stuck out your neck in many different ways. And as I was reading about courage, you know, I know that Plato, for instance, says that courage is the endurance of the soul, which is kind of an interesting way of putting it, the endurance of the soul. And then St. Ambrose, he's dear to my heart because he's from Milano, 350 AD. You know, he's a Milanese like me. And he put courage as one of the 4 cardinal virtues. Wow. And he actually said courage and fortitude. And somebody can say, well, is there a difference between the two? Somebody brought out the difference and was William Swan Plummer. He was a Presbyterian pastor back in 1800. He says, there is a difference between courage and fortitude. Courage faces and resists danger. Fortitude endures pain. Courage is for action. Fortitude is for suffering.
Interesting.
And I kind of wanted to take this almost as a springboard. Courage, action, fortitude, suffering. Do the two of them go together? Are we to treat them differently? Are we to embrace them both? What are we to do with a definition like that? Suffering and action. As a believer.
That's a unique distinction, and I think, and prior to even just hearing that, I might have put the two together.
Okay.
It is noteworthy because, at least here in our culture, and I know that we get a chance to have an audience with those that are in a land and a people that I love, the Italians, and we hope to see more and more great things happen there. But it isn't just here in our culture. We're facing this sort of global, not a pandemic, but a global pandemic of ideas that are really rival to the ideas that a child of light, a person who is called to be the salt in this dark and decaying world, we're supposed to be this preserving agent. And I think that both of these, sadly, are likely to be, put it to you this way, if we don't demonstrate some biblical, godly, holy courage, we're going to be begging God for fortitude because the suffering will soon come. You know, especially in a land like ours that has its root system in biblical ideas. There's something unique about this country and the freedoms that are ours, and the courage and the fortitude that it took for you and I to have the liberty to do what we're doing right now.
That's right.
So if I'm just convinced that when you know where you're going, and when you know you're on the right side of the argument, and there are all kinds of arguments today, right? We're sort of arguing about everything. But when you know you're on the right side of the argument, when you're on the right side of truth, forget the argument, but if you know that you stand on the side of truth, that should download to us a certain sense of courage. We should be bold because we know we're not in error. And it's not arrogance, but we know we're not in error. So if we won't stand for the things that we know to be soundly and biblically true, like if we won't demonstrate some courage now, then I think we will be begging God for some fortitude later, because a kind of suffering will come if, you know, we used to sing it in Sunday school, you know, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Do we hide it under a bushel? No. I'm going to let it shine. Well, if we don't, and we were as sons of light, we were once darkness, now we're light in the Lord. If sons of light, if we're afraid, we're not really sure if we're on the right side of truth or not. I mean, what causes us to be afraid? we will hide that lamp, and the darkness. I heard today, and this is really interesting. Evil never retreats. The only time that evil ever retreats is once it faces something that's stronger.
That's right.
So here you and I are, ordinary men, but filled with a power that is greater than the madness that's outside, around us. And so, but if we, with a strength, the only strength in this world that can rival evil, and evil will not retreat. Evil, like water, it'll find its way as far as it possibly can, unless someone with some courage pushes back. And I think that's what we're facing. We'll either stand in courage now, because not arrogantly, but we know we're on the right side of truth.
That's right.
With all these different kinds of issues, or we're going to be begging God for fortitude.
But see, looking at the definition of action and suffering, I'm looking at that, I'm thinking of the younger generation. A lot of them are not used to suffering.
No.
I'm looking at my father and mother. Man, they knew suffering. They went through World War II. And some of that trickled down to my generation. And as an athlete, you know that you need to suffer to achieve a goal.
Sure.
So your propensity is, this is the price I have to pay to get to that point, right? So it moves you into action. There is no pain, no gain. You know, like the slogan of Nike. But the newer generation seems to be more, don't rock the boat. Well, don't go there, it's too controversial. So it seems like everybody wants to fit in. You know, that fitting in, that it's easy, right? Because you're not going against the current. So the fitting in means that your uniqueness at some point disappears as well.
Sure.
Because you want to fit in with the status quo. And at some point, I think that the God-given uniqueness that you lost is going to scream and say, you're supposed to be salt. What are you now? You lost your saltiness, right? And there is one sentence that I love. You know, it's an unknown author that said that any dead fish can swim downstream. I love that, because, you know, as a swimmer, I said, oh yeah, you know, somebody can say, hey, I'm going down. You're going nowhere. Everybody's going down there because the current is taking you. You are dead. You are dead.
Yeah.
And to be spiritually alive, you need the power of the Holy Spirit, right?
Amen.
As you said earlier.
Yes.
Probably, I guess you've been labeled as fundamentalist, maybe, as fanatic, you know, because you become a threat to peace and tolerance, right, that everybody wants.
Yeah.
Have you felt that?
Yeah, I think that, so when you, coming back to your idea of another generation and sort of a softer generation, someone said this: bad times make good people. Weak people make bad times. Bad times make good people, like your parents and like your generation. But good people make good times, and good times make weak people.
And you go back.
So here we are, right? So here we are with, you know, here in our country, 50, 60, 70 years of really largely no opposition, no pressure. One of the biggest buzzwords in the church in the West for the last 3 decades has been relevance. So we have tried everything we possibly can to fit in. We don't want to offend anybody. We want to be as winsome as possible, which is understandable. Christ didn't walk around, you know, sticking his finger in people's eyes, to their eyes, to sort of frustrate them. But so I really do believe that we are reaping, well, the generation of my children, and that my generation, your generation were not like this. Everyone didn't get a prize.
That's right.
If they competed.
That's right.
Well, that idea, that the equality idea, is like, you know what I mean? The whole equality idea is an idea that we understand equality. You and I are equals in the image of a man, woman. It doesn't matter your race, creed, color. We're all equal in the image of God. But we took this equality idea and we turned it into, well,
everybody's entitled to
the same. And so that generation that grew up, never having no one, you know, what kind of world-class athletes have we been producing in this environment where everybody sort of is, everyone's great. Well, everybody isn't great. And that's not a bad thing.
And there is a second and a third place.
Yes, there's a second and third place. And that, if you like first place, you'll try a little bit harder, so you're not in second, third. So I think the generation that we're in presently, and the people that are actually running our nation, are folks that grew up, that's their generation. So when they think of equality, it's equal outcomes, everyone's going to get the same thing. And so when you begin to, in a culture that largely thinks this, because culture has largely shaped the minds of those that, even the church, well then when you begin to put forward ideas that are very plain and very contrary, you'll be labeled everything. You'll be labeled fundamentalist, you'll be labeled a racist, you'll be labeled a homophobe, you're against everything. But meanwhile, you're just simply saying, no, that's not really where we're at. So, but being on the right side of truth has given me the courage to say, especially as a shepherd, I look out and at a congregation and I think, one day I'll stand before God and I have to give an account for whether or not I did lovingly feed these sheep. And I don't feed them my opinions, and I've got a lot of those, but I feed them the true Word of God, which really does cut against the culture. So if you want to stand up, and it really doesn't take that much today, tell the truth. You'll stand up, and you will be labeled every ugly thing you can possibly label that you aren't, but it just sort of fits the narrative right now. Someone said today that the left knows that it cannot allow real, healthy, robust debate because they'll lose. So what they'll do is everything they can to shut you up. So if you, as a gospel son, a son of light, a leader of a church in Italy, a faith leader, if you come out and you say, hey, this is the truth, and you'll be labeled all kinds of things just simply for saying this is the truth. But you're on the right side of the right side of the truth. And what else are you going to give somebody?
There is one scripture that is one of my favorite, is Romans 12, right? Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Why? That you may prove what the will of God is. That is good, perfect, and acceptable. So if we are to prove something, we have to go against the current, right?
Right.
But why do you think so many people are confirming? Just because they want acceptance from man instead of acceptance from God? Because that is costly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, innately, none of us want to be loved, we want to be accepted. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. It's like anything, anything can become an idol, anything can actually, it's like what happened with Abraham and Isaac, his son. The son was a promised son, God gave him the son, he was a beautiful son, but that son began to take a place in that father's heart that the Lord said, wait. Yeah. So acceptance isn't, we all want to be loved. None of us go out trying to be marginalized. But the problem is when we care more about what men think about us than what God thinks about us. And what it might actually cost us. I think in our culture, and I don't know what it's like in Italy, you can maybe speak to that, but in our culture, I think that there are a lot of people that really are on the right side of the argument. They know what the truth is about a great gender, and
but for the sake of inclusion,
they are silenced because they don't want to be ostracized, they don't want to be labeled, they don't want to be canceled, which is so
it's social suicide in many ways.
Exactly. Yeah. It really is. It makes me wonder, though, personally, when you look on, are we how convinced and how convicted really are we that we are standing on the right side of the truth on a particular issue? And if we're really not, if you really do wonder, and I mean this, I brought it up on Sunday, but if you really do wonder whether or not gender is something that has its original origin in a divine creator, or it's now, thousands of years later in our highly advanced society.
We have 70.
Well, but now it becomes sort of a social construct to where your gender is dependent. If you're really murky about that, if it really to you is like, that's a really complicated issue. I would never try to diminish what's happening in the minds and the hearts of people that deal with this dysphoria. But if you and I as saints are a little murky, we don't really say much. We won't say much because we're really not that sure ourselves. So I wonder how much today in the American church, where we have tried so hard to be relevant and appease everyone and not offend anyone, because we want to reach everyone, because Jesus does love men. How much of that in the last 30 years have we sort of dumbed down our teaching to the people of God? And now they're really kind of lost on a lot of very fundamental, basic issues. And so
we're creating too much gray. In my mind,
it's so gray. Yeah, it's so gray. Now it's everything is a conversation. There is no absolute truth about anything. And now we have a conversation about everything, including, what is the biblical or even historical definition of marriage? I mean, so if we're murky, we'll go. And then if we care too much about what men think about us, we end up being not so salty and not light at all. We just kind of blend in the background.
There is that saying in English, if you do not stand for something, you fall for everything, right? And there is one definition actually that I liked in here. It talked about physical courage, which is bravery in the face of physical pain, hardship, even death, or threat of death, while moral courage is the ability to act rightly in the face of popular opposition, shame, scandal, discouragement, or personal loss. And I think we kind of fall into the second category, the moral courage. I mean, the physical courage, the bravery, I can think of some of the early saints. I did actually one podcast on Polycarp, great man, 87 years old, and basically he's taking on the council. Saying, bring in the beast, sure, bring in the fire, let me talk to you about fire that goes on for eternity.
Right.
If you haven't seen that, go back and watch it. But that is a conviction that he had. And he was moved to the point of death. How many of us really are so comfortable today, we're saying, no way. I mean, if I had to make that decision, I would never go that far.
I agree.
And there was one quote from Piper. He said, "Courage is indispensable for both spreading and preserving the truth of Christ. Therefore, true evangelism and true teaching will take courage." And I remember what Christ said in Matthew, saying, hey, you will be delivered to tribulation. You will be delivered to death. Why? Because of my name's sake. So he kind of forewarned us. If you stick to the truth, these are some of the consequences.
Yeah, I think, again, it's sort of the soil has been so soft. It's interesting, that in biblical history, they've uncovered one-handed farming implements in Egypt. So it was so easy to farm. You could just use a one-handed. You could literally.
The ox is doing all the work?
No, you could do the work yourself. I mean, the ground was so soft and so fertile. And so, then think about it. So then God comes and he takes the children of Israel out of Egypt, where everything. Now they are oppressed, but they take them out of a land of plenty, a land of prosperity, the land where rivers flow and bring life. And he takes them to a land where, if you've been to Israel, I mean, it is nothing but a rock pit. And so if you're going to plant anything,
it's hard work.
It is just grueling. And it's a land, by the way, Israel, that has no natural water source. So it's like, I'm going to take you from ease and affluence and where everything is just, and I'm going to put you in a place where for you to become who you're meant to be, you're going to develop some character, some muscle, some grit, and you're going to develop some faith, because there is no river God to pray to. There's no river running through here bringing life. Israel receives its water from the heavens, right? And so I wonder, right now if, the scriptures say that we've been, you and I as sons and saints have been called a strange people or peculiar people. A chosen people, special treasure to me above all but we are peculiar. And I've wondered if now the Lord's going, and you're going to get your chance. You're finally going to get your chance. I'm not asking you to be contrary for the sake of being contrary, but if north is that way, and the world says it's that way, like you were saying about any dead fish can swim downstream, and we're called to call people to true north, and we know it's that way, and everyone's going, no, it's that way. We know, but that's where, Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the, like, that's the direction. Well, if
that's
we don't,
the truth for you. It's not my truth. To go back to the absolute, right? So if you create gray, anything goes, right? And the enemy loves that, I think.
Now, you and I have to be convinced and convicted that what we have is actually true, right? And if we that's critical. If we're murky, someone wants, if it's a mist in the pulpit, it's going to be a fog in the pews. Like if we're kind of fuzzy, it's going to be out there very unclear. And so you're right. Your truth, my truth, objective truth. It's all. I mean, that's exactly what happened in the garden, right? I mean, the serpent came along. Did God? That's not really the only way. I mean, you're not going to die. And so there is a truth that not only sets men free, keeps them free, but it is true truth. And it's a rock. I mean, you and I, we can build our whole lives, this life and the one to come on it. If we doubt that, we're likely to be very
unstable.
We're unstable. We're tossed to and fro.
And I think that courage is the result of confidence in the promises that He has given us, not in ourselves, because that is limited. I'm thinking of Joshua. Here's God giving that daunting task of taking those nuts, into the promised land, and He's saying, "Do not fear," right? Do not be afraid. Why? Right. Because I will be with you. And He keeps repeating that. I think it's 365 days in the Bible we see do not fear. One per day. So if He's telling us, He's urging us, He's almost ordering us not to fear, why are we fearful?
Yeah.
Why do we subject ourselves to the lies of the enemy instead of hanging on to the rock, as you were saying before?
Yeah. Some of it, is because we're you and I have been talking about. We're unaware. We're a little muddy as it relates to our thinking and our theology and what really is the truth. And then some of it, Peter walked on water, but then when he looked at everything going on, he began to sink. So some of it is we don't, as faith people, we're unaware of the truth. We're not so sure it really is the truth. And number two, then if you look around right now, you wouldn't have to look around too far to go, oh my gosh, the world is falling apart. It's windy and it's wavy and everything's divided. And so I think fear comes too when our eyes are off the eternal one, and he's a rock. He's you and I are receiving an unshakable kingdom, but the one that we're living in right now is shaking. I mean, the very foundations of not just U.S. but the globe is shaking. And I think that right now there's an opportunity for you and I to be rock-like.
That's right.
For folks to look on and go, why isn't your heart troubled? Why aren't you afraid? Why do you stand? Why aren't you being blown as everybody else is? Well, it's not because, like you said, it's not because there's anything innate in you and I that's wonderful, but we know the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. Christ, He dwells within us, and that truth is, again, we've drifted so far away from a truth, the truth that it's little wonder that we're now talking about the things that we're talking about with any sincerity. You think, the conversations that your father had with you when you were growing up are not the conversations that you had with your children. I'm having with my children, because my children are asking questions about things that you and I would never even fathom. Because we've drifted so far away from the truth. Now we're having, again, very foolish conversations. Professing to be wise, they became fools. A fool says no.
So what would be your suggestion, your counsel, your mandate to those who are on the fence, to those who have become lukewarm? When you're looking at God's judgment on the church at the end, saying, hey, I'm going to vomit you out of my mouth. That's a hefty judgment. So those who are on the fence, those who have become diluted in their belief, what would you suggest to them? One or two nuggets that you can say, hey, be like a Joshua. Why? Because the power behind you is greater than anything that's going to hit you, right? What would you suggest?
There's a little line in the beginning of a book by Gordon and Gail MacDonald. And the title of the little book, probably back in the 60s or 70s, was High Call, High Privilege. And it was, but this little line, I've never forgotten it, and it just says this: untended fires soon just become a pile of ashes. So for the lukewarm, you've sort of drifted out to the edges of where the
Yes.
fire is. And so whatever you can do to fan into flame,
And go closer to
go closer
the
to
source.
Christ. If you're out of church, get back into church. If you have stopped reading the Bible, you could go to YouVersion, and there's like 35,000 different Bible reading programs. You can get back into the Bible, drink in the pure Word of God. And that's where our minds will be transformed, coming
right.
back to Romans chapter 12. So I would say, get back into the Word of God, get back into fellowship with the people of God. And like that coal that's kind of on the outside of the fire, if you'll set it back in, if you'll get it a little bit closer before too long, it won't be lukewarm. It'll be on fire and hot. So those are two simple practical things: back to the Word of God and back with the people of God, in the house of God. It's not just something that we do as a culture. It's something that the church has done that transcends culture. I mean, the church didn't start in America, right?
That's right.
So this isn't an American idea. This is a biblical idea, and those two things alone would change your life and my life. From a different this week to next week. I mean, it's just all there is to it. So those are two super simple things. I mean, they're so simple.
But they're powerful. I mean, one thing actually that I've been convicted of is, I gotta say this story is a funny story, because every morning I listen to the Word with Jane in bed. So what I do, I get up. This is crazy, because I grew up with my father actually being woken up by my mom making coffee. She makes the coffee and she comes into the room with a little cup going ding, 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 ding. That was his alarm, right? He gets up, he has his suit ready to go, boom. I do the opposite. I get up and I make cappuccino for Jane. Can you believe it? And I bring cappuccino in bed to Jane, and we're both listening to the Word, and has made such a huge difference even in our relationship. When you're starting together in the Word, you're praying together, it's such a strong, powerful bond. And that actually prompted me to wanted to start a program in Italian of the reading of the Word every day with a small commentary. I'm going to talk to you about it in a second. But well, guys, the battery died, so we didn't catch the very, very end. But I was talking about a New Testament reading plan that I want to launch next year in Italian, because nothing exists that way. When you're reading the New Testament, you have a short commentary and an action point. So you can be done within 10 to 12 minutes. And that will get us properly equipped to face the day. As we discussed, our courage comes from knowing that He watches our backs, He directs our steps, He fights our battles, He gives us the wisdom that we need, as long as we are in Him. Therefore, developing a habit of being in His Word is something that is so beneficial for all of us, Italian and non, because that will change our perspective. So let me know if you want to be part of this exciting project, and I will give you more details. And finally, remember that courage, that word comes from cur, which is heart. And it does stem from our trust in Him. It is this trust that allowed David to defeat Goliath, allowed Esther to risk her life and talk to the king, Gideon to fight an army that was 1,000 times bigger than his, and Daniel not to submit to the rules of the king and risking his life, as well as the first Christians that were willing to risk their lives rather than denouncing Jesus. So, dear friends, let's go forth in our environments, knowing that that power that comes from above resides in us. It's not our own, it's His. And let's use it so that the gates of hell will not prevail against us. Have a fantastic weekend. I will catch you next week. Please keep praying for me. I'm praying for you. I'm not saying that lightly. It's important to keep each other in prayer. And remember, please give the thumb up if you like it, and subscribe if you haven't done so. Ciao.